Welcome to Access Interviews, Zach Goldsmith.
Thank you very much.
Now, I always ask my guests to sort of introduce themselves, to explain what it is they're famous for and why we should know you, rather than take it for granted. So if you could just tell us.
Well, I've been editor of The Ecologist magazine for about 10 years. I'm now director of The Ecologist magazine. I do policy work for the Conservative Party on environmental issues, and I'm a candidate for the same party in Richmond Park, Conservative parliamentary candidate.
And you're also from a famous family, which gives you a lot of attention as well.
Okay, well that helps in terms of getting the message out. Yeah, absolutely.
Right. Maybe we can start with the environmental issues, because that has been at the forefront of your life and career.
Yeah.
So what is the most pressing environmental subject at the moment, would you say? If you had to narrow it down to one exact issue.
Well, I think the most alarming issue is climate change. But it's really a symptom of something else. It's not a problem in itself. But I think in terms of I look at my children, they're very young now, but I'm guessing what kinds of problems and threats they'll be facing in the years to come. I think climate change is really it. But that has all kinds of implications. I think the massive pressure on the world's resources, an expanding population, ever-increasing appetite for resources, consumption levels growing and so on. I think we're going to face a period of real instability unless we tighten our belts, unless we just move rapidly towards a cleaner and more efficient economy. I think that's very much linked in with climate change, but that's really the issue.
It's quite hard to go into all the different issues in detail, but in a broad brushstroke, do you think it's actually winnable?
Yeah, I do think it's winnable. I'm increasingly optimistic about it, actually, because for the first time, I spent the last 18 months looking at policy solutions to climate change. I'd never done that before. As a campaigner on the outside, it was much more about raising the awareness of these issues, putting them up the agenda. And when it comes to actually looking for the solutions, they are there. Almost everything that needs to be done, almost everything, is already being done somewhere in the world. And the fact that there are examples of best practice in almost every sector, I think tells us that it can be done. And what we should be trying to do now is make sure that best practice today becomes the norm tomorrow, and so on and so forth. You could develop, I think, pretty rapidly a clean economy, but it requires a bit of guts from our politicians. And I don't think we've had anything like enough of that. From no matter which country you're looking at, no matter which party you're looking at, I don't think we've seen anything like enough.
What is the biggest obstacle then? Is it a governmental situation or is it a personal situation?
Well, I think a lot has to come from governments, because in order to get enough people to do the right thing, change their consumption patterns, buy the right things, whatever it is that people are being asked to do, you need to really get to a lot of people, and I don't think we have time for that. There's an enormous amount the government can do, really a huge amount, and I don't think it requires huge political courage, actually. I think the solutions are largely populist, as long as they're handled carefully, as long as the initiatives that are introduced aren't clumsy and off-putting.
Just talking from a personal point of view, I get quite exasperated with trying to do my little bit for saving the environment, like light bulbs or recycling. Yeah. And then you drive down the motorway at 12 in the afternoon and there are thousands of lights on. What's the average man supposed to do when you look at...
That's the thing. Well, I think if there's one thing that everyone can do, it's apply pressure. Let politicians know that they're going to be punished if they do the wrong thing. They're going to be rewarded if they do the right thing. I mean, you just think about it. We can beg everyone to change their light bulbs, and maybe 10% of people will do in the next 2 or 3 years. But the government, at a stroke, can say, well, in the next 4 years, we're going to close our market to the least efficient light bulbs. You can raise standards pretty easily. Now, you know that Philips or whoever is not going to turn away from the British market. They're not going to say, well, we don't want to sell to British consumers anymore. They'll step up to it. They'll develop a new technology. They'll improve their product, and they'll deliver. We've seen that over and over again as the car standards have been improved. Companies squeal and yell, but they deliver because they don't want to lose access to the market. The key is to not put the regulatory bar so high that businesses can't deliver, but we can put it a hell of a lot higher than it is at the moment. And I think that's what the government needs to do. It makes it a lot easier for ordinary people. At the moment, actually, if you want to make green choices, you want to go by train instead of plane, you want to buy energy efficient appliances, you want to buy local organic food as opposed to junk on the world market, it costs more, and that choice isn't available to everyone. I think the government's job is to make it possible for everyone to make green choices. And I think by raising standards, by using the tax system more intelligently, by using the regulatory system more intelligently, that can happen, and it can happen incredibly quickly.
Do you think you do enough personally?
In my own life?
Yes.
Well, I do what I can. I don't like the idea of waste. I don't like chucking away plastic. I don't like leaving lights on and all that kind of stuff. And but I do drive, not very well, I admit, and
Not when you say not very well, as in
I don't enjoy driving particularly, but you know, I drive the most efficient car I could get at the time. I don't like flying, but it's not so much for environmental reasons. I just don't like the whole experience of it. I mean, most people would choose to take the train, I think.
How often do you fly?
I can't remember the last time I flew, but I don't, and I always avoid going to international conferences. I think they're largely a waste of time, although having said that, I am going to be going to one in the next couple of months. But there's a particular reason for that. I choose not to. If I can avoid it, I will. And if there's an alternative, a train alternative, I'll always do that.
I presume
but it's not something you can. You can't tell everyone to do the same thing because you know I go to Devon a lot by train. But I worked out that when I go with a large number of people to Devon, you know, the extended family, I could actually hire a private helicopter and get there pretty much the same price. And that's just madness. You know, the idea that you can fly to Manchester so much more cheaply than you can get there by train. You know, there are 36 flights a day from Heathrow to Manchester. It's complete madness. There's 60 flights a day from Heathrow to Paris. And you know you can get there more quickly, more reliably, more comfortably, in a more civilized way by train. You know, that is the future, and we've got to embrace it. But it requires a bit of government leadership on that.
I presume you always fly by private jet, don't you?
Always fly, I don't fly by private. I don't fly actually, but no, I don't fly by private jet.
Your sort of wealthier friends, do you ever lean on them, the ones that do run private jets?
Well, I mean, I don't. I'm not a finger wagger in that sense. I don't tell, you know, I mean, I do my thing, but I don't sort of pass judgment on the whole.
But I presume you have friends with private jets.
I have. Look, if I only maintain friendships with people who live ecological lifestyles, I wouldn't have many friends.
What do you do if one of your friends invites you on a private jet these days?
I mean, it's an abstract or an academic question because I just don't.
Well, have you been on one in recent times?
No, I have been on a private jet years and years ago, but I just don't. I don't fly. I mean, I don't. You know, I use the environment as an excuse to not have to fly because I don't like flying. It's not an experience.
Are you actually scared of it?
I'm nervous of flying. I hate airports. I hate the whole experience of flying. And actually, it's just. It's so avoidable.
The course that we're on now, what do you think will happen if we continue on that way within 20 years in the UK?
I think the projections in relation to climate change are truly alarming, and they seem to be getting worse and worse. You took IPCC models, they described their last report as wildly optimistic, but I found it pretty pessimistic, so that's bad news. There is something approaching a pretty good scientific consensus on this issue. Obviously, there are always going to be debates about it and how bad it is and quite how much we're contributing to, and all that kind of stuff will always be debated. But as far as science allows, there's a consensus on that. But even putting the issue of climate change aside, you know, it's a simple case of maths. We know that the population is growing. We know that the world's bread baskets are shrinking. We know that there are water shortages affecting 100 countries. We know that we're consuming much, much, much more per person in this country than the world can sustain. You need 3 or 4 planets to make it possible for everyone to live the lifestyles we do. I mean, you don't need to be a genius to know where that's going. With other people in other countries wanting to catch up with us from a consumption point of view, we're heading towards a real problem with resources, and I think that's going to lead to insecurity on a scale perhaps we've never seen before. I think it'll lead to friction between different countries. We're already seeing beginnings of that. I think that's a real issue, and that's a threat. And actually, even if climate change simply didn't exist, if you were to prove to me now that climate change was nothing more than a hoax, an anti-capitalist hoax, the report that I handed over to the Conservative Party last year would have been exactly the same. I wouldn't have changed. The foreword would have been different. We wouldn't have talked about climate change, but the policy recommendations would have been pretty much exactly the same.